Hi, everybody. Hope everyone's doing well. Ethan Prosnett. I'm in my office in Westfield.
Great. Dara?
Yeah, this is Dara Clisell. I'm here in Scotch Plains. I'm looking forward to this.
Great. Elaine?
Hi, I'm in West. Oh, I'm sorry. Helene or Elaine? And which Helene?
Actually, I was at, it was Elaine, not Helene.
Sorry.
No worries. You'll be next, so just go in right after.
Hi, I'm Elaine. I'm in my home in New Jersey and looking forward to today's conversation.
Elaine?
Ditto. I'm looking forward to hearing from you. I'm Helene Schlar, and I'm in my kitchen in Westfield.
We'll be cooking something very delicious. Carol?
I'm Carol Siegel. I'm in Union, New Jersey. I'm in my dining room right now. And I know that you're a great guide and teacher because we so enjoyed your tour of Spain the other day. Muchísimas gracias.
Wow, these are quick learners. I didn't know that everyone you speak Spanish. That's amazing.
We speak a little Spanish, just a little un poco.
Your accent's better than mine. Susan?
You want me to speak?
Yeah.
Sue Shessman. I live in Springfield, New Jersey. I'm here in my home, and I'm very much looking forward to learning with you.
Marlene?
Hi, Marlene Maderer. I'm here in Garwood, New Jersey, and I just would like to see what non-Jews know when they study the Old Testament. So I figured I should study the New Testament.
You have Paul?
I'm Paul Meshes. I'm in my den in Westfield for another few weeks, and then we're kind of moving on. I've been rattling Rabbi Prosnett's cage about comparative religion study for a while, and bang on, he did it. Good job.
Marion? Oh, Marion, I think you're muted.
How's that? Can you hear me now? Oh, great. Okay, I'm here in Westfield in my living room, and I'm very excited to study the New Testament with you. And when I was very young, I belonged to Temple B'nai Jeshurun in Newark, and we had a unit where we went around and we visited all the different churches, and I loved that, and I'm very excited to hear from you about the New Testament.
Arlene?
Hi, I'm Arlene. I'm in my home in Westfield in my family room. Actually, I'm around the corner from Mary and Brand. And anyhow, I really don't know much about the New Testament, and I'm looking forward to learning with you because I know you're a great teacher. Thank you.
See you muted.
Gracias.
Jean?
Hello.
Gene Rosner in Westfield. Actually, I'm anxious to learn the Jewish sources of the New Testament, and hopefully we'll have a course on the Quran as well. So
Great.
I apologize. I'm going to have to leave early to get to my granddaughter's ice skating party, which is a good excuse.
Yeah. I'm inclined to try and come with you. Okay, Phyllis?
I am in Boca Raton, Florida, and my hair is wet because I just got out of the pool, and it was beautiful there, but I wouldn't miss this. I came up to hear this because I know nothing about the New Testament, but I find the subject of religion very interesting.
Eugene?
Hi, I'm Eugene. I live in Westfield. I'm a member of the temple. I'm interested in Judaism and Jewish books and so on. But New Testament is so closely related to Old Testament. And generally, Christian religion is based on Judaism. And I'm definitely interested. I know something, but very, very little. I want to learn much more than I know. And also, it is interesting to know about differences between different Christian sides. And I know a little bit more, know a little bit about some of them, but mostly I know no more of them. I know, again, not very well, but little bit know Russian Orthodox because I lived in that country. And my friends, they were not religious. They wanted really just to communicate with others. And of course, I had good friends and still have good friends who I can classify as Russian Orthodox, but they generally are not very religious. But maybe I know even little more than some of them, at least, about that. But I definitely want to expand my knowledge of New Testament. It's very.
Great. Thank you, Eugene. Hillary and
I'm Joanne Landau, and we're working in Cranford, New Jersey as we speak. But I tune in to learn principles that I can use in life. And I figured by listening in, I can have a principle that will fit into my top 10.
And also as having been raised as a Catholic, converting to Judaism 35 years ago when I married the love of my life. I know both sides of it and would love to hear the lessons that you would share. And we also will apologize in advance if we have to leave early because we're supposed to be working, but don't tell anybody.
And Hillary and Joanne are our newest members, so we welcome you to our temple community as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you, Rabbi.
And I see Ronnie Epstein.
Hi, nice to see everyone. You're a great teacher. I love learning the many, many times we've been together. And I just needed to learn more about the New Testament. I'm just not that familiar. And like Jean said, to learn the Judaic background and basis of a lot of it. So
Great, thank you. And
thank you for teaching it.
Thank you for coming. Malka Novak. We also have Faye and Nan. Hello to everybody. Okay, so I see some people wrote in the chat. Let's see, Rabbi Prosnit, you took a class at HUC with Union Theological Seminary and love comparing different books of the Bible and looking at different theological points of view. Marlene, you're wondering if what we call the Bible is the same as what non-Jews call and study in the Old Testament. So these are all really wonderful questions, and I agree with many of you. I just think that studying comparative religion is very important for the world in which we live, and especially as I'm in Spain now, looking at how the kingdom here, which was Catholic, had decided to expel the Jews, and that actually influenced that religious theology influenced actually the Jewish people's diaspora throughout the whole world, is not just fascinating, but really is a huge indicator and piece of evidence as to why and how religion can just really shape the entirety of a people's future and the way in which they evolve. So I'm going to share screen now, and just to let you know, I have a separate screen up here for my notes. So if I'm looking this way, it's probably because I'm referring to my notes. If you have questions, you can ask them in the chat, or there's a raise hand function, or if you would like to, if it's pressing question and you just have to know the answer, you can just unmute yourselves and ask away. So we're going to start here with a piece of art. But first I'm going to do this mode. Here we are. Great. And sorry, my computer's freezing a little. Okay, can I get a thumbs up if you can see? Amazing. So, we're going to start here with a Tissot painting that was actually shown at the Brooklyn Museum not too long ago, but originally debuted almost 100 years ago. What do you see here? You can call out or jump in the chat. Who's this person in the middle, do we think? Jesus, yeah. Let's see. Oh, looking at the chat. Looks like Jesus and teardrops from people.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And what do you notice about the colors?
It's very gloomy, very dark.
It's very dark, but who's dark and who's not dark?
Oh.
The people around him are dark.
It looks like it might be in the cave where he's, when he's buried.
Ah, he's in the cave. So actually, Dara, do a lot of people, or can I get a raise of hand as to how many people have read the New Testament? Or parts of it? Okay, great. And are most of the parts,
But how do you get the screen
do
back?
many people know some of the stories that, like, what are the stories? You could just jump in. What are the stories that you know from the New Testament? Things about what happened in the narrative.
In the cave, he was put in a cave after the crucifixion, and after 3 days he rose, or he emerged. The stone was rolled away that closed the mouth of the cave, and he emerged, and his disciples saw it. Mary Magdalene saw him first, I think.
Right, and that rising is what symbolizes the holiday of
Easter.
Easter, right. So that's a very, very famous story. The way that they taught it to us actually in Bible school was they took us to this, I wouldn't recommend this, but when I was little, my teacher took us to like the basement and made a fake cave and then had ghosts jump out. And it was, yes, it borders trauma, I think. But that is, just imagine that feeling. You have a Jesus crucified and then you bury him in this cave. And then one day you go to see the cave to perhaps pay tribute, emotional tribute to Jesus and his life. And then all of a sudden you see that this huge boulder is moved aside, the cave is empty, and Jesus is no longer there. So the obvious conclusion is that Jesus has risen from the dead, and that is why we have Easter. That's what it symbolizes. What else do we see in this picture? Why do you what else do we know? What facts about, or what stories have we heard about the New Testament that can help us make sense of what we see in this painting here?
Well, one of the legends is that while he was, those 3 days that he was in the tomb, he went to the underworld and freed the souls of the of the dead that were, hadn't yet gone to heaven because he hadn't been born yet. Maybe that's what this is.
Amazing. So we have one of them that he freed these entrapped souls. Um, we have tears that symbolize what. Does anybody know why Jesus was crucified?
Oh, come on.
Jesus he was crucified under Pontius Pilate he was a rabbinic scholar, and when he was going through the lessons of what he believed in, Pontius Pilate ordered his death, and that's why he was put on the cross and crucified.
I think, wasn't it also because he claimed to be they say he was claiming to be the king of the Jews, and that would have been a direct affront to the authority of the Roman emperor.
Correct and correct. Yes. So, and from a theological standpoint, when we think of Jesus, Jesus was crucified on behalf of Christians to atone for humanity's sins. So it is through the crucifixion of Jesus and Jesus giving of himself in that way, his sacrifice of himself, that atones for our sins on earth. I'm going to stop here for any questions so far.
Becky, that's what I learned also growing up too. So it's accurate in terms of from the Catholicism that I had learned too.
Mm-hmm. So,
is there a theological explanation for what I see is a distortion of common sense? Jesus was crucified, and yet we see no evidence of crucifixion on his body. There's no blood in his hands, in his feet, nothing. A crucifixion is an agonizing death. We don't see any distortion in his facial features, etc. So in fact, we see a look of almost contentment on his face. So I'm wondering whether there's a theological explanation for that.
So that's a very acute observation. This is actually I would say, a departure of how Jesus is normally portrayed in many paintings. But this is occurring after his crucifixion. So Tissot actually created, what was it? Over 200 pieces of artwork to match the New Testament. And Tissot was an artist who lived in the 1800s and in the late 1800s, and he actually reconfirmed in the Roman Catholic Church after kind of having this epiphany. And the reason why I bring this in to start our teaching today is because after 10 years of actually going to Jerusalem and traveling back, visiting different churches and different Christian communities, he made all of these paintings that eventually became very well known, and exhibitions all over Europe came up where people were visiting just to see his paintings, and eventually they were published into Bibles and were so commonly read and associated with this imagery that this became a very, very well-known, I guess, association, you would call it, with Christianity in Western and Eastern Europe. And this is supposed to actually be after Jesus is crucified. Pictures of him during crucifixion, which actually I have not included in this PowerPoint. You're 100% right. The act of crucifixion is a terribly, terribly excruciating act where your bodily muscles, your whole body breaks down step by step, including your bones. And the tears are twofold in this picture based on what Tissot had explained in his biblical rendering. One, they are tears for the fact that Jesus had to sacrifice himself on behalf of all of humanity's sins. Secondly, they are tears of joy because he's back. Jesus is clad in white. He's back in white. He's not dead here. He's just simply his human formation is dead in this, but his spiritual formation in this is very much alive. The people, humanity, is in black. But I would be very surprised if we were to find if we were to see a picture or a rendering in sculpture or painting of Jesus and that did not show blood to symbolize, or nails just in his body to symbolize that crucifixion.
Becky,
Mm-hmm.
are most of this particular painter's rendering of Jesus Christ generally in black and more in the black and white? I mean, I see a little of the yellow because it's very gloomy. It's if this is going to be the orientation in connecting with religion, it's Renaissance had colors and other forms of art, but this is for the basis of a religion is to me very frightening to look at.
I would agree. No, most of Tissot's artwork, and you can see it on the Brooklyn Museum website, is not in grayscale like this. However, he was such an influential artist during that time, and the fact that Bibles with his paintings were not only published at Mass in the early 1900s and distributed all over Europe, that to me at least signals that this is a very important piece that we should be looking at when we study comparative religion, because it undoubtedly influenced the way that people justified, the early seeds of white nationalism and Christian white supremacy, or white supremacy grounded in Christianity.
Excuse me, Becky, may I add something also? The lessons that I had also learned, and if I also am looking at this from an artistic interpretation too, I learned that Jesus Christ was not only the Son of God, but he was the light and the love. So this portrayal in this painting indicates the light of love in the rendering of Jesus Christ. And then if you look at the teardrops, they're also like, if you will, candle lights. Mm-hmm. So as much as I could also understand that it portrays a very dark image, the light still is predominant in terms of the central figure being the love and the light of Jesus Christ, and the lights that shine above him through the teardrops. But that is still love, because love can also be communicated through tears of joy as well as tears of sorrow. And I just thought I'd add that in.
Thank you. Right, we're going to move to this next slide. So an introduction to the New Testament. Just very quickly. So we have essentially the New Testament is seen as a continuation of the stories that we have in the Old Testament. So for us, our Tanakh, of Jesus Christ, his followers, and the early Christian church. And we got accounts of Jesus's life, but most notably his story of birth. We have a collection of 27 documents written in Greek that the early Christians added to the Hebrew Bible as sacred scripture. And this includes the Big Four. I just named it that. So I see, sorry, I'm just trying to catch up on chat as well. So we have the Big Four, where we have the four Gospels, the books of Acts, we have 21 letters, and the book of Revelations. Excuse me. So Faye, I also see that you had said something. Looks like the light of love, yes. And the humans reaching to touch Jesus. So, I apologize. I'm having a little trouble with my slides right now. Okay, great. So the big four would be, does anybody want to jump in? They're names, they're all names. And they're all
Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
okay, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Great. And do we know who wrote them? Does anybody know?
I don't think we know. I think they were all written after Jesus died and like 60 years after his death, right? So,
Sarah, have you taken this class before?
I took a course in the New Testament in college, so.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I'll shut up.
No, this is great. So here's a nifty little timeline. Now we have the death of Jesus happening close to 30. And this is now, I guess we would say after Common Era. And we have all of these books being written, at least as far as we can date them, from the original Septuagint documents. So like they were written in Greek. And so we have these documents, and we can date them as far back as we can see the earliest decades before 100. There are perhaps maybe about 100 or 150 more documents that are not on this timeline, that are not included in the traditional canon, the traditional New Testament canon. This has been a dispute that still goes on to this day. The inclusion of the book of Timothy, for example, was very controversial for many different people because it included stories of a young Jesus who actually got so angry he would murder people when he was angry, if he disagreed with them. There are many other books that fall into that category, but these are the books that just made it into the canon over time. So depending on which academic track and, to be honest, also like which perhaps denomination you align yourself with, your canon of the New Testament might change. So who were the Jews living during the writing, the creation of these documents? At the beginning of this Christian era, Judaism was divided into many different groups. We have the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Essenes, the Zealots, and then what some people call the Jesus movement, the earliest followers of Christianity before it could be called Christianity. They're also known as the Nazarenes. But in spite of differences between them, the groups were united by a core basic beliefs. We would, I would say, like in Reform Judaism 2021, everyone on this Zoom call, we follow a form of Rabbinic Judaism that was created post 6th century. So the Judaism that these people created and followed looked in some ways worlds different from what we understand as Judaism, which is to be expected. This is over 2,000 years ago. But it's important to know about these people because they are the people who are being referred to in the New Testament, and these are the people who are influencing the writings. The New Testament was written because there were people who disagreed with the way that Judaism was unfolding during that time. So in the same way that we have the rise of the Reform movement in the late 1700s, or maybe the seedings rather of the Reform movement, and then the early 1800s in Germany, we can compare this change that they wanted to create, this reform, as to what they're doing during that time. These people wanted to understand Judaism differently. Many scholars believe that the early Christians saw themselves as Jews. They did not see themselves as Christians, especially because it wasn't until Paul's writings and his ministry, where he traveled to different parts around him, including Africa, as basically a proselytizer, that we have the formation of institutionalized Christianity with those churches. So as we move, so we have the Sadducees. The Sadducees were an aristocratic priestly class of Jews influential in the temple and in the Sanhedrin, and their name is derived from the high priest Zadok, since the sons of Zadok were the most worthy to minister the Lord in the temple. So mentioned in Ezekiel, they're also mentioned in Matthew. They originated when the wealthier elements of the population united during Hellenistic period of Greek cultural revival around 200 BC. And they were a conservative priestly group. They held on to older doctrines and also opposed the Pharisees, both politically and religiously. Both groups believed that the Pentateuch, the Torah, they believed in the Pentateuch, but they had different understandings of life after death, resurrection, and the Sadducees were also known for being incredibly strict. Then we have the Pharisees. A lot of people would say that, like, the Pharisees would be the group closest to us right now in modern times regarding their beliefs in Judaism. So as of the New Testament period, the Pharisees were the largest of the three groups, and they had the most power by far. They were mentioned several times in the Gospels of being on the receiving end of Jesus's rebukes in many ways. There are very famous accounts of Jesus even as a young boy of 12, being outside of a temple and coming into the temple and causing a ruckus because he ethically could not receive what the Pharisees were doing. Then they were also, as a group, the Pharisees were distinct for being opposed to the political rulers of Israel, focusing on ceremonial washing, strict adherence to oral law, or tradition of the elders. And their theological beliefs included the eternity of the soul, the existence of angels, the belief in the resurrection of the dead. And actually, if you wanted to create a chart of the Sadducees and the Pharisees, these last few beliefs, the eternity of the soul, the existence of angels, the resurrection of the dead, would be, if you just flip them over and make them opposite, would be the core beliefs of the Sadducees. They were most at odds with each other. The Sadducees because they had the most money, the Pharisees because they had power in numbers. And then we have the Essenes. They're not mentioned in the New Testament, and they're likely a sect that's an offshoot of the Pharisees. We mostly know them from their writing and their influence in the Dead Sea Scrolls that we have in Israel, actually on display. And they were in opposition to what they believed to be a corrupt priesthood. As a joke, many scholars will say the Essenes just hated everybody. They didn't like the Sadducees. They didn't like the Pharisees. They were very strict in their beliefs, and they were also very reclusive. So we have the Dead Sea Scrolls to give us history about the Essenes. We have very little other than archaeological evidence of where they lived to give us much information about them, and they're not mentioned in the New Testament at all. So pause for questions. Any questions so far or comments? Okay, so as we move on, we're just looking at a very quick layout of the Old Testament and the New Testament. For us, the Old Testament, the Tanakh is Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim. Then we have the New Testament, which is the four Gospels. So Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, which all display the story of Jesus. The book of Acts, which shows us the evolution of Christian churches. Paul's letters, which give us an account of how he proselytized and set up churches. And we have Hebrews, the epistles, and the book of Revelations. One thing I want to point out as well about why is this happening? About the Bible is that its layout is also a little different from what we're used to in Torah. So does anybody actually have Tanakh with them in front of them? Rabbi Prosnit? Oh, amazing. Okay. So
I have the whole Bible here. I have the New and Old. Is that good?
I have my Tanakh. I just had to get
okay.
it.
So Rabbi Prosnit, could you open to, I don't know, Genesis 30, 30:26? Or, yeah, 30:26.
Yes.
Can you hold that up to the screen? Great. So if you look at Rabbi Prosnit's screen for 1 second, and then if you turn the page, are there title headings?
Just says Genesis 30:26, and then
Right.
the Torah portion.
So, as we can see here, this is actually a Bible in Spanish, but in English it would do the same thing. We have Genesis 30:26 as the last line. We have titles that mark the different narrative stories in the Bible. So this one says Los hijos de Jacob. The previous one in 29 is Jacob y sus mujeres. So that actually really influences as well the way in which we perceive these stories. The narratives are remembered and told. And we want to keep that in mind when we think about the influence of Christianity as we move through these centuries. So we just learned these three groups of Jews who are all very at conflict and vocal about it with each other in their theologies. And these are the people who are being referred to at that time, and these are the people who are living with Jesus. What is a gospel? So a gospel is actually derived from the Greek word evangelion, which means good news. So when someone says, I come bearing a gospel, this is the good news. The good news being the birth of Jesus, right? Like the birth of this new king, someone who's going to save us from our sins and bring us not into life on earth that is sinful, but bring us to the life beyond that is true life, the afterlife. But there are also arguments that we have being made that the Old Testament has actually foreshadowed already the New Testament. And a common argument of this is in Jeremiah 31:31. And it's labeled the New Covenant. Does anybody want to read this? Oh, Ronnie, oh, great.
Ronnie, do you want to read? Okay. The days are surely coming, says the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. It will not be like the covenant that I made with the ancestors when I took them by the hand and bring them out of the land of Egypt. A covenant that they broke, though I was their husband, says the Lord. But this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, says the Lord. I will put my law within them, and I will write it on their hearts, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. No longer shall they teach one another or say to each other, know the Lord, for they shall all know me, from the least of them to the greatest, says the Lord, for I will forgive their iniquity and remember their sin no more.
Thanks, Marilyn, and thanks, Ronnie, too, for jumping in. Okay, so what are we reading here? Do you think that this is a sufficient new covenant, that this is evidence for a prophecy made in the Old Testament, in our Tanakh, in the words of Jeremiah, that Jesus is the true king, that Jesus is God?
Becky, not knowing much information about it, and what stands out to me is that there's now, unlike the Old Testament, when the God that we generally can't see, most of us, is that, the words that they will know me, it's a connection to more of a human person now that I read from it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Also, it says here, they broke the covenant. So that must be, they broke the covenant and now he's making a new covenant. So there's, I don't quite get that.
Oh, that they broke the covenant over here, a covenant. So it will not be like the, so we're going to look at 32. I'm just going to actually bold that to make it bigger. It will not be like the covenant that I made with their ancestors when I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt. So this is referring to Exodus. We have a covenant that they broke, though I was their husband, says the Lord. So he says basically that the Jews broke the covenant that was given to them when they left Egypt. And we know that, right? Because God actually said, you, this generation of people who are wandering, you will wander for 40 years and you will not enter the promised land. So he's comparing that with what will come, right? A new covenant to come. Eugene?
There are a couple things that I noticed here. First, in the beginning of this passage, I will make new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. He mentions two houses. A little later, past that piece that you just you read, he said that I will make this, but a new covenant I will make with house of Israel after those days, and so on. Therefore, I noticed this difference, and I'm wondering why in the beginning two houses. No house of Israel is not sufficient, apparently, in the beginning. But after that, only house of Israel mentioned. And later, at the end of this, closer to the end of this passage, that people should not teach each other and so on, because they will already know, and it doesn't say everything, but it clearly almost says everything. Definitely means know everything. Definitely people of house of Israel. But I want to ask that what the difference in this sense here between these two houses, and why it mentioned this way that I described. No, what I didn't describe. I just read based on I said based on what I read. It's not my description.
That's a great question. The house of Israel and the house of Judah, I'm not sure. I have to be completely honest. I would assume that he's referring right now to the different tribes, whether depending on which biblical academy you belong to, either there are 12 tribes of Israel or there are 14. When he says making a covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah, in the context of where Jeremiah is speaking, which is in the middle of war and ravage in his land, and sheer famine, actually, he might be referring to a severance, severing of their tribe in that regard. But I wouldn't know. I would have to look that up.
I understand what you mean, but he mentions in the beginning, as I said, in the end, close to the end, one in the beginning, two, but not 12. In either case, he mentions 12 houses, only mostly two. It could be similar to tribe, but bigger groups than just tribes. It could be two different, very big sections that he sees there.
Right.
I don't know. I'm just guessing, of course.
I see. Okay. Yeah, no, that's a really good question to bring up, and I will definitely look into that. I'm also looking at questions that are posted in the chat. Jesus being the Messiah, as well as what does he refer to as their sin? These are all great questions. And we will get to that actually pretty soon. So I'm going to move on. Before we move on, I just want to ask, do you think, if you read this, do you think that this is evidence moving forward, as many Christian scriptures interpret it, that this is evidence that this is a prophecy, that the Old Testament actually includes a prophecy saying that a new covenant will be made, and that covenant is with Jesus as God? Would you interpret it as sufficient? I see some head shaking. Paul,
I think laying the groundwork.
It's laying the groundwork, so maybe it's kind of moving to a crescendo.
But there's nothing here that says it's going to be a future person or prophet or king, or does it? Am I missing something? There's nobody that's going to be the intermediary according to this.
Okay. What about the last line, for I will forgive their iniquity and remember their sin?
No more.
No?
Remember the sin no more. It's important part that you didn't read this meaning.
Right. Yes.
Yes. And may I say something about your previous question? Of course, first, what I know, again, my knowledge is very limited. What I know, first, Christianity as a religion was a Jewish religion, not others. After that, it was somehow changed or whatever, directed to be religion of non-Jews. at least to a high degree in the beginning. And here what I see, maybe it's partial answer on my question that I asked a few minutes ago about House of Israel and Judah, and after that only House of Israel. Therefore, the new covenant will be with House of Israel only. Maybe it's on purpose not mentioned House of Judah, only with those that support that new way of seeing what's going on, religion and so on. And if Jesus is a part of that House of Judah, then in this case it could be meant in the meaning that you said, otherwise not.
Very interesting. So we're going to move to actually the synoptics and John. We have Mark, which was the first gospel that was written. It was written during a time of crisis. And when we read Mark, actually, it's a little hard to understand. It's a little truncated. It's very short. And we find other parts of Mark and Matthew and Luke to overlap with one another. But Mark is almost the most raw of the Gospels. Then we have Matthew, and we know that it's the first gospel in the New Testament. So it's the first one that appears, the Gospel of Matthew, if that makes sense. When we read the New Testament, the first gospel that appears is Matthew, even though it's not the earliest gospel. It links to the Hebrew Bible with a genealogy of Jesus's ancestors, including Abraham, and links him to David, to the King David. And it's known as the most Jewish, in the sense that Jesus is portrayed as a very observant Jew who teaches Torah to his followers. We have this concept of Jesus being a teacher, and the rabbi is a figure of someone who teaches. And it's very famous because it includes his Sermon on the Mount, which Martin Luther King Jr. referred to numerous times in many of his own sermons. And then we have the Gospel of Luke, which is part 2 of a volume work, because it actually corresponds to the book of Acts, and it was written in a Greco-Roman community. And that means that it also includes a very deep discussion of Gentiles. But mostly what people remember about the book of Luke is the emphasis it has on serving the poor, and that the poor as well can be just as deserving of God's mercy and God's love as everyone else. And then we have John, which actually does not follow the pattern of what we call the synoptic gospels, the 3. And it doesn't include the story of Jesus's birth or baptism. But it has Jesus speaking in first person in a very poetic way, which is why it is included in our core gospel literature of the New Testament. So this is the canon again. And we have this as the history, really, of Jesus. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and then Acts to accompany Luke. But the canon was organized in this way so that Luke is actually separated by John. And this is just an overview of where we find the synoptic dilemma, which is how we can, in some ways, unite those overlapping pieces, or sometimes literally word for word repetition of specific narratives from the 3 gospels, the synoptics, that occur in some and don't occur in others. So we can see that Mark actually influenced Matthew and Luke very heavily, because 76% here correlate with a huge part of Luke, and also with almost half of Luke and Matthew. And then we have parts that are unique to Matthew. We have parts that are unique to Luke. But actually, scholars have not figured out yet where what has influenced each other. I think that actually Mark has probably influenced Luke and Matthew, and the scribes actually had full access to Mark to create their stories, but we're not sure yet. And this is where we're going to end today. So we're going to end with Jesus and the Pharisees. And I want to know what you think about this particular passage, whether you think it is anti-Jewish, what you learn about Jesus, what you learn about the Pharisees in this passage, and just what general reaction you have to it. What do you think, if you were to read this story not knowing anything about Judaism or anything about Christianity, what would you walk away thinking? So I'm just going to read it for time. Jesus denounces Pharisees and lawyers. Luke 11:37. While he was speaking, a Pharisee invited him to dine with him, so he went in and took his place at the table. The Pharisee was amazed to see that he did not first wash before dinner. Then the Lord said to him, "Now you Pharisees, clean out the outside of the cup of the dish, but inside you're full of greed and wickedness. You fools, did not the one who made the outside make the inside also? So give for alms those things that are within, and see, everything will be clean for you. But woe to you, Pharisees, for you tithe mint and rue and herbs of all kinds, and neglect justice and the love of God. It is these you ought to have practiced without neglecting the others. Woe to you, Pharisees, for you love to have the seat of honor in the synagogues and to be greeted with respect in the marketplaces. Woe to you, for you are like unmarked graves, and people walk over them without realizing it." Jump in, Eugene. Yeah.
I cannot say that I agree with everything what you just read. Again, I don't want to argue with Luke. It is really much more important that my opinion, at least what I think. But about first paragraph, that it is necessary to be clean inside, but why being clean inside prevents you from being clean outside also? Therefore, I don't like that he doesn't wash his hands, because he wants, if he wants to touch something that at least clean outside. Of course, he wanted to say that he didn't wash his hands because it is dirty anyway. It is dirty inside. But therefore, he made his point this way. But at the same time, I think being clean inside doesn't mean you should not be clean outside. And in the second paragraph, I don't understand why it is like graves that are unmarked. I think Pharisees try to do exactly opposite. They try to mark themselves. They try to show themselves. It even described right here that they seat of honor, respect in the marketplace. It is really showing themselves. It is making big mark on the grave. Why it is unmarked grave? That I don't understand so far.
Okay. I think that it's actually just so in terms it so I would respond to that by saying that this is a symbolic of something else. I think hypocrisy is being pulled on here. The fact that they care too much what's on the outside and not enough of what's on the inside is what Jesus is saying. Like, why do you care if I wash my hands or if I wash this? Because and it's almost like if you look great on the outside and you look like you're doing the right thing, but inside you're a very greedy individual and you're not acting, you're secretly perhaps acting against law, like Torah law, then you're a hypocrite. So why, like, what does it matter? What matters is that I'm pure on the inside. But you care too much about what's happening on the outside. That's how I understand this. Dara?
Yeah, wasn't he sort of laying the groundwork? If he's the same one that wrote the Book of Acts, I think you said that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in the Book of Acts, I think it was, lays the groundwork for abandoning the laws of kashrut and the external rituals in favor of the internal, right? He said it's more important what comes out of your mouth than what goes into your mouth, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is kind of laying the groundwork for that it's really, what's coming from the heart. And therefore, this is a religion that everybody can adapt. You don't have to follow these rituals of washing your hands and whatever.
Right, so he's asking us, in many ways I see this actually as a very reform centric discussion, like to learn all of the rituals and then debate and make the decision of which one is most authentic to you to follow it. If you just follow rituals perfunctorily and there's no meaning in them, then what's the point of following rituals? And so he is definitely laying the groundwork of that. I think this is also a commentary to a social and economic commentary for people who were not as rich as the Sadducees and Pharisees, and those outliers who could not participate in society or religion because they were literally too poor to clean, if that makes sense, clean themselves. Marilyn, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, the statement that came to my mind that relates to, I thought it was in all religions, was or is, cleanliness is next to godliness. I don't know, and this denounces that perspective. I don't know, which is really interesting that arrived in my thought.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, Luke is most definitely, the book of Luke very openly and explicitly comments on the ways in which Jesus disagrees with how the poor in society are treated by their own members. And so this definitely could be a social commentary as well. And it's interesting because actually, if you look at what like sermons that were given, for instance, in England in the Victorian and Edwardian periods, many of them actually shy away from the Gospels. Almost a huge percentage of them do not focus on the Gospel of Luke. And we do have that idea that cleanliness is akin to godliness. But at the time of Victorian, Edwardian England, that just was not something espoused in society.
Thank you.
Any questions? I'm going to stop screen share at this moment. Great. And Marlene, you asked the question, I just want to get to this. You asked the question, what did you refer to as sin? Does anybody, that's a really difficult question. Or you mean, what does he refer to? Was this in relation to just Jesus being crucified?
It's in relationship to the part that we read, where he specifically talks about forgiving sin at the end.
Ah, okay. So,
talked about the iniquities and forgiving sin.
Yes. I will forgive their iniquity and remember their sin no more. And Eugene, you correctly pointed out, no more is very integral to that. So I guess we'll end on this. I would love to know what you think, just about sin in general, because it is actually not something I believe we talk about much in Judaism. It's not something that's very, at least in modern Reform theology, it's not something that we focus our theology on. This concept of committing sin, the concept of inherent sin. I personally am not even sure if I believe in evil. So, how do you react to the word sin? How do you react to it in Judaism or to yourself?
Subjective. What somebody is a sin is not to someone else.
Right. So
it's not always so obvious, like murder is a sin, but others are very moral judgments, you know.
Phyllis, can you give us an example
Well,
of, yeah.
Someone might, the evangelicals feel that homosexuality is a sin. Don't. And we can go on, there are many more like that.
Right. Let's see. Elaine, do I see a hand or is that not a hand? Oh, okay.
Becky?
Yes, Faye?
Becky, can you please explain what you meant when you said that you're not sure that you really believe in evil? Can you elaborate on that? Because it seems a little unsettling.
Oh, I mean, I'm not sure if I think so with sin, it often accompanies the idea that evil is inherent in every human being in many Christian theologies, in many Christian denominations, so that like we are born with inherently with sin. Does that stop me at any point you would like for me to elaborate? And I don't know if I agree that we are all born with an inherent seed of evil and sin. I'm not sure if I believe that that is born within us. Does that make sense?
Becky, Tom,
Hi, Tom.
I got to jump in. How are you? Good. Let me ask you, well, then, do you think that people are evil and it's a struggle to be good, or they're inherently good and it's a struggle not to be evil?
That is, man, what I would give to have you as my theology professor. Interesting. I think that, I know what I want to believe. What I want to believe is that we're all born good and it's a struggle to not be evil. And I think deep down, I believe that. I think that studying world history makes that conclusion very illogical to me. And at the same time, I think that honestly, like believing in God sometimes, like having a faith is also it's nonsensical. Like I personally am studying to be a rabbi and believe in God, devoting my life to something I've never seen before. You know, like there's something that I wouldn't say is troubling about that, but that doesn't make sense to me about that. I have to,
Okay. Yeah, I can understand that, but let me pose another question to you.
Sure.
Do you feel that you carry a little piece of God inside, or all of us carry a little piece of God inside, or is he some abstract that's outside of us, sitting off in the left field? Because if you think that he's inside of you, a piece of you is inside of you, then you're inherently good, and it's a struggle not to be evil.
Right. Well, I mean, I think that To me, yeah, I think that God lives within us in that way. But that's also, I recognize that that's also a very personal theology. Um, and it's influenced a lot by my upbringing too within Christian spaces. Um, but when we speak about sin, it it even like its etymology is grounded in a concept of evil. So I think it's actually a very, when we're studying Christian theology and understanding the concept of inherent sin, which is a core element of Christian faith, that that has to be acknowledged, that when someone says, you know, the inherent sin is alive within all of us, that there is um there is a sense that we are born with an evil inclination. And for many reasons, and it could just be, I don't know, to really just protect my soul and mind. I really resist the temptation to believe in that.
Well, I understand the concept of the empty milk bottle. But I can't. The empty milk bottle that we're all born in a state of sin.
Oh.
Okay, and that at baptism, to Catholics, at baptism, that goes away. That magically goes away because you dunked in water. Okay, so you know, and I get that. But as far as evil is concerned, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe in ancient Sanskrit or Aramaic, the word for evil actually means that an archer missing the mark.
I actually don't know. I can look that up.
I would like, I think I may do a little research on that.
Okay.
Yeah. It's because, you know, that the Bible, the New Testament's been written and rewritten so many times by so many different people over so many different ages. It's hard to say what was really in the Bible because it's been reinterpreted so many times. Like, where's the Book of Mary?
Well, right. We also said earlier, and I see those hands. So, two M's. We said earlier there are numerous books, over 100 that we know of, that just never made it into the canon of Westernized Christianity and the Western New Testament. So that's very important to note. By no means could we assume that this is a full rendering of a complete faith that was created during that time. Um, does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I'll let you go ahead and answer the questions that have popped up.
No, these are
I'm
great
sure there's
questions.
a few.
Marlene, I just want to get back to you and also close out sin.
Yeah, well, my thought is that what you've been talking about just now lends me to think that that paragraph I asked about, you believe refers to innate sin. And when I was reading it, I didn't necessarily think that was what it referred to, but rather sinful acts.
Mm.
So, and that's why the question, well, what does it mean by sinful acts? I wasn't really thinking that it had to do with, you know, innate or original sin.
Mm.
So I wondered what your thoughts on that were.
Well, I think when we talk about sinful acts, I'm inclined to agree with Phyllis in the sense that it's subjective, and it was really dictated by what Torah taught us in Deuteronomy, and then what they were trying to reform, you know, in not only Deuteronomy, but Leviticus, Deuteronomy after Exodus, right? Like when we get our new set of laws, anything that's like an act against those laws would be committing a sin. And when I read the New Testament, I see a group of people who see a lot of hypocrisy in the act of performing those laws and not actually feeling inside spiritual change or transformation or having a desire to better society, etc. And they're acting sinfully within their hearts, even if they're outwardly projecting holiness. And that's actually just dictated by the laws that we have already. So they're trying to reform those laws. And then when we dig deep into it, we also have the concept resuscitated of original sin that we find in the that we find in Genesis with the Garden of Eden. And that's something that actually emerges for us through the emergence of Christianity as a solidified religion. So sinful acts, I think, in this case of Jeremiah 31:31 is actually just referring to the sin of not listening to God, to creating idols, the golden calf. These are all sins that actually accumulated and led God to deprive the Jews from entering the Israelites from entering the promised land.
So that's kind of how I saw it too.
Mhm.
Which lends me to think that it wasn't setting us up for a Messiah, or for Jesus, but rather that it was just a reflection of God's thinking on all those things you just mentioned.
Interesting. So for you, it just wouldn't be sufficient evidence, right?
Not at all. Not at all. Yeah.
Interesting. I mean, it wasn't just Jeremiah. There are other passages in Isaiah, and other prophetics saying, that, I mean, Isaiah is actually replete with a lot of what Christian would call, I guess, like Christian theology would call evidence,
Mhm.
to foreshadow the coming of the Messiah as encapsulated and shaped through Jesus. So it could be the accumulation of that, but this is also seen actually as a very powerful passage, because especially in the words of Jeremiah, who is a very emotional prophet, unlike some of our other prophets. He was seen as very, very emotive.
Okay, thanks.
Marilyn?
I just didn't lower my hand. I'm
Oh,
good.
okay. And
Yeah.
Eugene, you'll take the cake for the last question.
Thank you. It is not question, it's rather comment than question. First, it is those, no, generally, mostly I think about passages that I read in Torah, but in New Testament and everything around that, of course, it is something to think about. And what I said, I will not go into details, it will take too much time. What I said about clean hand, not clean hand, unmarked graves and so on, I gave some thought to that. And again, maybe one day when there's, if I remember, when there's more time, I'll say this. I wanted to say mostly about evil and sin. About evil. No, by the way, something what I will say will be influenced by what I know from Kabbalah. That humans are basically born with possibility to do evil things and to do good things all together. And people, when they live, and especially when they develop, they are in fight between good and evil. And doing mostly good, trying to do mostly good, less evil. It is development, it is changing. And human differ from animals, that animals are fixed and humans are changing. This is from Kabbalah, what I said.
Well,
And
that's one form of Kabbalah. That's not every.
yeah, what I know, as I
Right.
said, what I know. I'm not specialist in that, just some knowledge. And about sins, that was mentioned, that different opinions about homosexuality that is seen by evangelists, but in Torah many times it's mentioned also, and punishment is capital punishment for that, and even the whole cities are destroyed, Sodom and Gomorrah, for that sin. Therefore, there's different opinions everywhere, and what is sin, what is not. For example, it's last piece of what I want to say, I think very important. Murder is apparently sin. But murder, there are a couple cases when it is allowed. One of them important during war. You try to kill your enemy, they try to kill you. And it is not considered sin, despite some religions see it as sin. But anyway, and this is why people that believe in that try not to go to war, not to go to army. But anyway, even if to look at this, if to understand, during combat you have to shoot, otherwise you will be shot. No choice. But not during combat, just at the time of war. Some people, some soldiers understand that they're just sent, drafted and sent to war. And enemy, there are many people that really want to fight, but there are many even more of them who also are sent to war. And I know cases from World War II when soldiers understood, not during combat, but understood this and didn't kill enemy. Therefore, it is very complex, more complex than just murder is bad.
Yes, and that's actually influenced the Israeli army's code of ethics when it comes to war as well and fighting. They're
Oh yeah, very good
so,
example.
so that's all very important. I'm actually going to, so this was our introduction class. This was a lot. We covered probably a semester's worth of New Testament. So I am very grateful for your continued presence and attention. I would actually love if you could do me a favor. Some of you have my email address. I will put it here. It would help me if I just, now that we have this kind of foundational overview, if you do have any questions or things that you would like to learn from this class about the New Testament or comparative religion of New Testament or New Testament during different times and different places, any of that, if you wanted to let me know, you can let me know here. I'll stay on for about 10 minutes. You could put it in the chat or you can email me if you want to think about it. And if you're just here for next time, then that's fine. Just as a note, because our class falls very close to Purim, we will be actually focusing on the women in the New Testament. But it's kind of impossible not to give this historical overview before jumping into text to give context. So please just let me know, and thank you as always